show. Author's Corner, she asked about the books they wrote.
All right, the name of the book is Your Move One, The Issues, and the author is Tom Erickson. We had a great conversation off the air about where this is all headed, and it's so fascinating to me, and I love his main character. So, Tom, thanks so much for coming on Author's Corner.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, let's talk about you and writing. How did this all start?
It's kind of it was a weird kind of a thing. We met a couple while we were vacationing in Hawaii, and Scott was a writer of what they called made-for-TV movies back then. And he asked, after we played a few rounds of golf as couples, he asked me to read one of his screenplays that he had written. And I did it. I liked it. And I also thought to myself, I can do this. And that's how it started. It turned out it was a lot harder than I thought. And he made it look easy. But that got me started. I never thought about writing anything. My background was finance, but that really got my motor going.
And you decide for this book, you've got everything wrapped into it, meaning when I say everything, you've got the things that I like: murder, espionage, these crazy alliances. And this novel is set in a really cool place. One of my favorite cities is Chicago. But what's interesting about it is this is an equestrian village that's outside of Chicago. So how did you pull all this together? Because they say you write about a little bit about what you know about. And you're right, your background was finance, but there are elements in this, I think, that you brought to the table while you were putting this together.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Chicago, moved out to the suburbs for high school and thereafter. And then after I got married, we lived in the city for a few years. And then we moved to Barrington, which is the suburb you're talking about, which turns out is an equestrian area. It's wide open spaces, 5-acre zoning and that kind of thing. And for somebody who worked in the city and was just working with numbers, it was nice to get away and live on a lake. So a lot of the scenes that I describe are the house that I actually bought and that we bought and lived in Barrington.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, of course, your main character is Patricia Shaver, who is an heiress to a big, big, big banking fortune, but there's more to her, right?
Yeah, all the characters, just as a sidelight, all the characters when I first started writing, rather than think up characters, I thought it'd be more fun to just use the people I knew and stick them in places that they probably wouldn't recognize. And so Patricia, my wife's maiden name is Shaver, so Patricia Shaver is the main character. She's an investigative reporter, wealthy, good-looking, a person with a mind of her own, which pretty much describes Pat, except for the wealthy part. We kind of made that ourselves, but and she's the heir to a banking fortune. Just a whim, she uncovers a file which would indicate that the patriarchs of her family, the grandfather and great-grandfather who started the bank, may have been associated with the Chicago mob, which is known as the Chicago Outfit. And so she is worried that all the philanthropy that she does is underpinned by dirty money. And so she wants to find out exactly how this, if it's true and how it happened. Her started on an innocent kind of a investigation, but as things go on, she manages to get her nose into the affairs of many, many people, not necessarily white hats. And as a result, she becomes sort of a target of an unwitting target, just because of her investigation to unearth what's going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the things that you told me when we spoke is you love the bigger picture.
Yeah. When the first book that I had published by a vanity publisher was in 2012. After a friend of mine suggested I send it to someone that they knew in Hollywood just to see what might happen, and of course I was very anxious for that to happen. And the person who read it liked the characters. And he also made a recommendation. He said, you make reference to the Mexican Kazu in Japan, various other Middle East kind of references, and so on and so forth. Wouldn't it be interesting if you actually, instead of referencing these people, actually created characters and talked about them and incorporated them into the book? Well, that suddenly made this a local story into an international story, and it created would make the books a lot longer for sure, and it actually led to the fact that I could no longer end a story with one book, that I needed a bunch of books to tell the whole story. So each of the books stands on itself and has an ending, but it also leaves a lot of unresolved issues. And in the scheme of things as it turned out, the book I wrote in 2012 called Operation Snowshoe is now the third book in what will, I hope, be 7 books. I've written 6 of the 7, because in order to get all the stuff about all these other worldwide organizations and how they might fit in, I had to create more stories, and it really made the plot a heck of a lot more complicated, and obviously made the story a great deal wider. And
you've got 7 in total, right?
It will be 7. I've started the 7th book, but I've written 6.
So, wow, so interesting.
As I tell people, if I ever got popular, I have product.
And product is important, so that's a very good thing. So we start with this one, which people can get on Amazon and wherever great books are sold. Tom, what do you hope they take away from reading Your Move Won the issues?
Well, I hope. I mean, it's. I don't have any, formal training, so I hope that if they can bear with the first kind of setup to try to introduce this wide variety of characters across the globe, that they'll begin to understand, how this lone investigative reporter, unbeknownst to her, seems to always mess up somebody's plans. And oftentimes it's the CIA and the FBI here at home, as well as getting into the crosshairs, say, of the mafia, both here and both in Chicago and New York, and as well as other mafia type groups, as I mentioned, the cartels and some of the terrorists in the Middle East are involved, and the Kazu in Japan.
Yeah, so, it sounds like to me you're having fun doing this.
It was fun. I mean, but it got complicated, and I try to keep it so that the only way I could think of having such a wide story would be to use internal thoughts with each character, so that the reader would understand where, how some of these things could happen, and the logic of how one person who isn't trying to get in trouble gets in trouble. And so I make extensive use of and I italicize and put it in first person in each of the sections, no matter who the person, or who in a particular part of a chapter, or whoever is the main character in that chapter. So you get their thoughts and what they're thinking. And so it allows me to have this major story over many books to be constantly updated as the reader is going along, because in book 2 I'll make references to things that happened in book 1, so the continuity, I hope, stays together. But it's just a very the central theme of all of this is, do the ends justify the means? If you had to take a philosophical thing, and every character, whether they're the law enforcement or the black hats, all seem to embrace this kind of an attitude. And I leave the reader always to judge whether this is the right thing or not. But that would be the central theme.
It's interesting what Tom has created here, and especially when I look at one of the main characters, really, Patricia Shaver, and the fact that she's this big-time heiress, and why does she have to get involved in social injustices? And then why does she have to set up this giant charitable foundation and try to really equal the playing field or level the playing field? So we're going to talk more about Your Move 1, The Issues, with Tom Erickson, coming up next here on ATN.